Hey, thank you. I am really excited to be here. My name is John Kodumal. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of a company called LaunchDarkly. If you haven't heard of LaunchDarkly, we're an Oakland-based company. We're about 450 people in the dev tool space selling creating and selling the world's best feature management products. So we help engineers use feature flags to build better software faster. I have the honor of being the CTO, one of the co-founders. We started the company about 8 years ago. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, one of the topics that came to mind when Shreya and Lev approached me about speaking today was product strategy. And this is something that was really interesting and important to me, primarily because I've always felt like at LaunchDarkly we've been like 3 to 6 months behind in terms of like actually articulating strategy at like the pace and depth that our employee base has been asking us for. And that's kind of like been a constant struggle. And so this year I've spent an inordinate amount of effort kind of trying to fix that situation and getting ahead of things. So like last year in our annual planning, we did our the first time ever we did sort of like 2 years of planning. And so we presented a 2-year plan to the entire team, rolling out this brand new framework that we were excited about. We rolled it out, everybody was super excited, and they're like, all right, what's the 5-year vision? And I was like, oh shit, all right, I got this, don't worry. And the thing was, I do have this, like it's in my head, it's been in my head since I started the company as a founder, but it's been really challenging to sort of like think about the right artifact to deliver, right? Like when people are asking for product strategy, what do they mean? What are they looking for? What are the components of that? And so I've learned a lot about that, and I wanted to share some of the things that I have learned. One question that might come to mind is like, why am I talking about product strategy in an engineering meetup, especially an engineering meetup that's focused a little bit on, I think the title is like hacking the engineering process. So there's a lot of interest in like ways to improve process, ways to improve speed and velocity. Well, one of the things that I believe in is that like for a startup to be successful, you need a few things. You need velocity. You need to be building software really quickly. You need execution. You need to be building good stuff. But you also need alignment. You need a lot of focus to actually build something in the competitive world that we live in terms of like delivering software. You need all 3 of those things to work really well to win in the market. And a lot of times what I've seen is that people that are building software, they'll map all their problems to velocity. Like we can't produce feature X fast enough. We can't do Y fast enough. We just can't compete because we're not going fast enough. And the reality is, maybe you are delivering fast enough, but you're also delivering a bunch of other stuff that is just not aligned with the product vision. That's not actually having the impact that you think it's going to have, or it's not important. And that's actually slowing you down, right? Because you're diverting resources away from important problems to solve a bunch of problems that actually aren't aligned with your company's strategy. So I view strategy as actually an important lever to velocity. So I wanted to talk about it. One other thing is like, one question that I have is like, what is the makeup of this audience? How many of you are founders or entrepreneurs? A bunch of founders and entrepreneurs, that's great. How many of you are engineering or other leaders, like people leaders? And how many of you are individual contributors? Awesome, so like there's a really wide spread of people from people sitting down and writing code and contributing that way to all the way to founders. And for every one of those 3 groups, founders, leaders, and individual contributors, there are things that you need to get out of having a product strategy. So for example, as a founder, obviously alignment is an incredibly important piece of having a product strategy. Being able to have alignment through strategy is what helps you scale as a founder. It allows you to delegate more because it allows you to articulate a vision or that strategy and have others execute on that vision for you. If you can't adequately articulate your strategy, then you sort of have to be hands-on on far more than you need to be, and you will fail to scale out. One of the things that I've always believed in as a person on the other side, I was an engineer for a long time, is the more alignment and understanding you have of the company's strategy, even as an individual contributor, the more impact you can have and the more that will help your career, right? I've always shared a piece of advice, which is like when you're working at a company as an individual contributor, try to find yourself working on the product that has the most impact to the company, right? Because that will magnify your impact as a contributor, and that'll be helpful for you in your career development. Product strategy is one way to think about doing that as well, right? If you are making sure that the decisions you're making as an individual developer map and align to the product strategy, then you will have more impact as an individual developer, and that will massively help you in your career. So here's another way that I think about alignment. I like cheesy metaphors. Here's a cheesy metaphor. An early stage startup it's kind of like a speedboat, right? You don't have very many people on it. You all know where you're going, and you can go really, really fast. But here's the thing. If you're like 1 or 2 degrees off course, you're going so fast that you're going to end up like completely off course really, really quickly. So the issue with early stage startups is lack of alignment compounds really quickly. Errors in alignment compound so massively that a small error at an early stage will end up in probably in failure. But LaunchDarkly, my company, is now like a cruise ship, right? It's not the agile and nimble speedboat that we once were. We're about 450 people. We have more resources than we ever had before. We have specialists in areas that we never had before. When I have a data question, I can just go ask a Slack room, and an army of people will come back with a report for me, and that is incredibly powerful. We have more resources than ever before. It's kind of cozy on there sometimes. But here's the deal with the cruise ship. It's really, really hard to turn. So with the lack of strategy, the lack of alignment means that like if everybody is shifting in the wrong direction, it's really, really hard to get the boat to go back in the direction that you want it to go. One more thing about alignment. I believe that a lot of teams, when they think about alignment, they think about it at a shallow level, and they only look for alignment at that level. Shallow is probably the wrong word. What I mean more is like the highest level, at the level of the company mission. So for example, if like you're at an ed tech startup, right, it's pretty easy to align your employees around the mission there. Maybe it's like we're empowering underserved minorities to get access to education technology, and you're all aligned around that mission. But that level of alignment is not sufficient. You need levels of alignment down the decision stack all the way down to like the execution, the how things are done. And a lot of that requires strategy. It's really easy to get alignment up there, but alignment has to map all the way down to execution. And if you don't have that, that's going to be problematic. So when I think about alignment, the alignment problem, how to communicate alignment and how to maintain alignment at any stage company, from a small startup all the way to a late stage startup and beyond, I think about it in terms of levels and documents or artifacts that support alignment at those levels. At the highest level, we're talking about something like a mission statement for the company. It's something that has a long-term outlook, maybe 30 years. It's the reason your company exists. It answers the question, why is my company here? Below that, with a shorter outlook, maybe 10 years, is a vision. And that the vision document answers the sort of like what question. What is the future that my company is going to create? What impact am I going to make on the world through my product? And below that is the strategy document. And the strategy answers the how question. It's the pathway. It's the way we get to the vision. You need all of these things for alignment, and you kind of need them in that order, right? It's pretty hard. I would definitely not recommend trying to come up with a strategy document without a vision, without a clear mission. So I view those things as prerequisites. You need a mission, you need a vision, and then you need a product strategy. And if you're missing any of these things, you're going to be missing alignment with your team at some level. Okay, so hopefully I have motivated the why question, why you need a product strategy. The next question is, what does a product strategy look like? What does a good product strategy look like? And I'm going to attack this by sort of pointing to things that I think make up a good product strategy. And the first thing that I'll say is that product strategy is going to be stage appropriate. What I mean by that is your product strategy as a two-person startup should be, out of necessity, very different than your product strategy if you're Salesforce, right? That seems obvious. But the way it manifests itself is sort of like in the depth and sophistication of your product strategy, but not necessarily the format of that strategy. So at an early stage, when you're like two founders sitting in a room, your product strategy could just be a set of words that you share back and forth as founders that give you that initial alignment. You probably don't have the resources to do a lot of like market analysis, competitive analysis, customer interviews. So you're being really scrappy. And on the feelings versus facts bar, you're probably like, your slider's kind of way to the left. You're relying on a lot of hunches and intuition, and that's okay, right? That is kind of what you need to do to move quickly as a really early stage startup. But as you mature, as you get more resources, as you have more people that can do some of that research for you, you're going to start sliding over, and you should have more and more facts supporting the ideas in your strategy. You'll rely on things like the data that you gather from customers actually using product, which is something you don't have as an early stage startup, or competitive analysis, or hands-on customer interviews, things like that you didn't have before. So you'll start sliding over more, and you'll have more facts supporting your positions. In addition, as an early stage startup, you're kind of in survival mode. You're kind of thinking about the next 6 weeks, not the next 6 years. That's natural, and that probably means your strategy has a shorter term outlook. So you're thinking about maybe 1 or 2 years in the future. Of course, you've got a longer term, sort of like big, hairy, audacious goal. You need that. You need to articulate that to your investors and others. But in terms of like strategic vision, it's probably a much shorter window, like 2 years, 3 years, something like that. It's not going to be 15 years, right? But I guarantee somebody at Salesforce has like the 15-year strategy document for Salesforce, right? And
Google and Facebook are smart. They know they can plan more than you.
yeah, Google, yeah, Facebook. I mean, there's a difference between sort of like planning and strategy, though. So that's one thing I will separate. Annual planning, that's pretty common. We do like 2 years of planning now. Doing 5 years of planning, that's pretty unusual. But having a 5-year strategy, that is not unusual. Okay, so good product strategy. I realize that the acronym there is GPS, which is kind of fitting. But good product strategy follows a particular narrative structure, or at least I believe it should. Anybody know who this person in the picture is?
Is that the one who did Harry Potter?
No, it is not the author of Harry Potter, but good guess. This is a woman named Barbara Minto. Barbara Minto is amazing. She was part of the first graduating class at Harvard Business School that admitted women. So she was one of the first 8 graduates of Harvard Business School that was a woman. She was also the first woman consultant at McKinsey. She wrote a book. Google her, read about her life, the stuff she went through at Harvard Business School and the position that she's in. Amazing story of resilience, an incredible, talented woman. She wrote a book called The Minto Pyramid Principle. The Minto Pyramid Principle is now one of the most influential books in business communication. And if you haven't read it, I highly recommend you read it, because you're all in tech. No matter what you're doing in tech, you're a writer, and communicating ideas effectively is part and parcel of your job. And Barbara Minto has a great narrative structure for business communications that can benefit all of you if you start applying it. It's not that long of a read, actually, and it's great. One of the things that I've used is the narrative structure that Barbara Minto proposes, which follows this format, SCQA, situation, complication, question, and answer. And below that, every answer has arguments, and those arguments are supported by evidence. And that's the pyramid principle. It's a logical way of framing a position that's supported by evidence. So this is something that you can take and apply to almost any context, but I'm going to instantiate it on product strategy. So let's first walk through the components of it. First is the situation. The situation is a common basis that we all agree upon, right? There's nothing controversial about it. It's the world as it exists today. It might be backed by data. In fact, it probably should be backed by data. But anybody reading that situation, you're doing a couple things by sticking it at the start of your narrative structure. You're getting them on board with you. You're getting them to agree with you. And you're establishing a common basis that will be material to the rest of the argument. Super important to have a situation. But second, but below that is a complication. It's a challenge. It's the change or the obstacles to the current situation that have to be overcome to achieve success, which leads to the third component, the question. What does success mean? What are we going to do about it? How are we going to solve that challenge or fix or address those complications? The question, depending on what you're writing about, the question can be very different. For us, in the context of product strategy, the question is almost always like, how do we win, or how do we succeed, or how do we grow? It might be different for a product strategy if your company is like a lifestyle business or you're trying to get acquired or something like that. But in the world of like high growth startups where you're all trying to win for that whatever definition of win you have, there's a very simple question. And then finally, there's an answer. There's an approach, an answer to how the obstacles will be overcome. It takes the situation and the complications and merges them together and figures out a strategy towards achieving a resolution. So let's instantiate that framework on product strategy. If we're talking about the situation in the context of product strategy, what do we need to do to establish a shared foundation for product strategy? Well, often we're talking about what the market looks like today or what our position in the market looks like today. So the components of that, and again, these are just suggestions. Not every product strategy needs to have all of these things, but you could have things like the history of the company, the market position of your company, what your value proposition for the products that you sell to your customers is, who your buyer personas are, market segmentation, who you're trying to sell to, or not who are you trying to sell to, but who are you currently selling to. What are your moats? What are your differentiators? Okay? So now we move on to the complication. If we know what the current situation is, let's move on to the complication. What are the potential components of that? What is, effectively, it's sort of like, why are you doing more, right? You haven't won yet. There's something stopping you from winning. What is it? Is it market fit challenges? Maybe you're struggling as a startup. Maybe it's not flying off the shelves. You might need a pivot. The threat that you might articulate is, we don't have product market fit yet, and we need to figure that out. Another threat might come from internal sources. So maybe you're having a retention problem, and that retention problem is preventing you from building anything because your engineers are turning over and you're losing a lot of tribal knowledge about how your product works. That could be an internal threat. Competition, probably one of the biggest ones that you're thinking about is competition and how that competition is impacting your strategy. Externalities. So anything in the external world that could negatively impact you. Perhaps you're a company where regulatory conditions might impact you, or a change to some law could impact your business model or your way of doing business. Or maybe you're just like a scofflaw, like you're doing the Uber thing and you know what you're doing is illegal, and an externality might be like somebody's going to get wise to that and start enforcing it and cracking down, and your entire business model might collapse. Or maybe it's like macroeconomic conditions, right? Maybe you're selling the world's most high-end luxury coffee grinders, and market conditions are making it the case that high-end buyers no longer have disposable income to buy a $4,000 unimodal burr grinder for making espresso, right? Like that could be the condition that you're facing. So this component of product strategy, what I would say about this is, like, you should be very objective about it. You should be honest and candid about what your actual threats and challenges are. This should not be aspirational. Well, none of our competitors are any good, and so we're not really worried about them. Like that's not really helpful. That's something that you might say externally, but product strategy has to be honest. If you're lying to yourself, you're not producing an intellectually honest product strategy, you are probably going to hurt your business. Moving on to the answer. What are the components to a product strategy that actually speak to the situation and the threats? Well, there are a lot of different components, and these are really going to depend on the nature of your business, and really this is a creative exercise. It could be things like pricing, right? Maybe your strategy is to outprice all of your competition. Maybe there's a technological innovation that allows you to price your offering 50% cheaper than anybody else, and that's your go-to-market, or that's your strategy. Maybe it's brand. Right? Maybe your brand is so strong that you can leverage that as a strategic advantage. Maybe it's packaging. Maybe it's messaging. Maybe there are new product offerings that unlock new buyers, and you're going to capitalize on that. Maybe portfolio strategy, thinking about how you're allocating engineers across different investments. Maybe that's a strategic component for you. Maybe there's intellectual property, right? You're thinking about filing patents, and that's a component of your strategy. Maybe there are flywheels you can capitalize on. Maybe there are other levers. This is intentionally broad, right? My thing about this is there's really no one-size-fits-all template. Like there's not like an outline that I can hand you in Word doc format, and it's like, just go fill in these answers paragraph by paragraph, and you'll have spat out a perfect product strategy. It is not one-size-fits-all. The components on this slide that are interesting for one company are completely uninteresting for another company. So connecting that, I really do believe that product strategy is a creative endeavor. And it's probably an endeavor that is best handled by a small team, like 2 or 3 people or 1 person, usually just a founder at early stages, that comes up with a strategy. All right, so another aspect of strategy that I want to talk about, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but when you're writing a product strategy, your audience is your employees. It's internal. There is a very different kind of document that you can produce. How many of you are familiar with Andy Raskin at all? A few people are familiar with Andy Raskin. If you haven't heard of him, go take a look. He does a lot of consulting nowadays, but a lot of his consulting is based on this like strategic narrative framework that he came up with, which is really interesting. It's a great way to structure a pitch deck, and lots of companies have structured their pitch deck using like the Andy Raskin framework. It's sort of like, here's the state of the world today, but something different is going to happen, and that's where we come in, and we're changing the world because there's a particular framework that Andy Raskin espouses. And so what I would say is like, that's a really important document, but that's not this document, right? You're targeting an internal audience, and you're not really pitching. This is a great narrative framework and document that you can use for 2 different audiences. One, like investors. If you want to make a pitch deck, this is a great foundation to use for a pitch deck. It's also great for customers. So you can make a sales deck. You can make an amazing sales deck using this narrative. But you probably won't make a great product strategy using this framework. So here's my diagram of how these things are related, right? You absolutely can use components of the internal product strategy in like your external pitches and your customer decks, but they're not the same thing. Keep them separate. And you can go from one to another pretty easily. It's not that hard, but like the tone, the messaging, the information that you hide versus the information you share is going to be different. And again, connecting that to like the purpose of these things, you're making this for employees. Your goal is to achieve alignment, and alignment leads to profit. On the other side, your product pitch, you're making that for customers, or you're making that for investors. Your goal is to either convince a customer to buy your product, or to get a VC to back you, all of which leads to profit. Okay, more components of product strategy. A good product strategy is both falsifiable and prescriptive. Falsifiable, when I say falsifiable, maybe that's not the right word for this, but the concept is this. It should be possible for someone to pursue an alternative strategy, and there should be feasible alternative strategies. Like if your strategy is, we're going to win by being the best, or like we're going to excel at the field of excellence, right? Or some BS like that, right? That's not really a product strategy, right? A product strategy has to be something that your company is pursuing, but a reasonable company in a similar position as you could pursue an alternative strategy. An example of a good component of product strategy is, say, something like open source, right? You could pursue a strategy that hinges on you being an open source offering, and for many spaces, just as feasible alternative strategy is to go closed source and be, SaaS and cloud hosted, right? So that's probably a reasonable component to a strategy. But just saying like, we're going to be the best at executing, it is probably not falsifiable. Like there's no competitor out there that's sort of just like, our strategy is to not be the best at execution. And it's also not prescriptive, right? You can't really go like, our strategy is to just out excel everybody else. That doesn't like help your teams actually do anything. It doesn't tell them in a decision-making context to pursue decision A or decision B. Because all you're telling them is, well, do the more excellent decision. Like whichever path it is, like do the better one. That's not helpful, right? So a good product strategy should be both falsifiable and prescriptive in my mind. I touched on this earlier. Good product strategy should be supported by data, but again, that needs to be stage appropriate. I connected that back to the Minto framework, right? Because in the Minto framework, below the SCQA level, every answer has arguments, and those arguments are supported by evidence. But again, like recognize that is going to be stage appropriate. At times, some of that evidence is going to be like, this is going to be my gut. But this is what supporting data can look like as you have the resources to actually do some of this research, right? So in the white are some of the components of product strategy that I talked about earlier. things like internal threats. And then the orangish color, we've got like the kinds of supporting evidence that you might produce when you have enough resources to do so. So let's imagine that like in your product strategy, one of the threats, the complications that you enumerated was internal threats. How might you do research around that? How might you supply data supporting the idea that that is a real threat? Well, you might do risk analysis. Maybe in the example that I talked about earlier where I mentioned like maybe retention was a problem, you might be using like internal engagement scores to sort of quantitatively demonstrate that it really is a problem. Or you might have other operational metrics that are relevant to the idea of internal threats being a problem. So for example, if one of your internal threats is like we can't keep the system stable enough, right? You would map that to operational metrics demonstrating that like your mean time to incident remediation is 42 hours, or in Atlassian's case, 4 weeks, right? And that would be a problem. Market position, you're going to back that up with things like market research, and maybe a TAM analysis, analyst briefings, customer interviews. Competition, you know, at the earliest stages, you're probably just Googling other people's websites. Who makes feature flags? Where can I buy feature flags, right? That's your competitive analysis. Later stage, you know, you might have third-party consultants that are doing compete analysis. You have win-loss reports from customers and your sales folks. You have a lot of different data-driven approaches to demonstrating what competition is, what it looks like, and how it's harming you. Something like buyer persona, you might do like an ICP, like an ideal customer profile analysis. So the more sophisticated you get, the further along you get in the startup journey, the more data you're going to have supporting your strategy. Next, strategy's got to be multi-layered. I believe this because one of the things that I said earlier on is that communicating strategy is incredibly difficult. And if your strategy is like the Brothers Karamazov of SaaS strategy, like it's like this 300-page novella, you know, good luck trying to get 700 people to read that when they're already busy doing their work. What you need is to be able to present different levels of detail so that people can align at the highest level, and when they have questions about interpreting the highest level, they can refer to the deeper levels and have that available. So, you know, you don't have to do it in this way, but like I think one pretty effective way is to think about like a low level of detail summary document with maybe like 2 to 4 slides. So if you stop one of your employees by a water cooler and say, quick, what's the product strategy for the next 5 years? They can rattle it off because they've looked at those 4 slides. At the next level, I think the main artifact is typically a document. Medium level of complexity, maybe 7 to 10 pages, again, not like 300 pages. And that's going to have like the main meat of the argument, the SCQA narrative that we talked about. All of those different factors that play into that we showed earlier. But below that 7 to 10 page document, you've probably got reams of data and evidence that are supporting the positions, the assertions that you've made in the strategy document. All right, so hopefully I have motivated why you need a product strategy and like what's in it. I thought I would go ahead and instantiate this on a particular company, and I chose GitLab because 1, I ran out of time. I was making these slides this morning. And 2, GitLab was kind enough to publish their entire strategy on the internet because GitLab is an incredibly transparent company. So we're going to go with GitLab. Anybody here from GitLab by any chance? Okay, I was hoping somebody would be because interestingly, they have 2 product strategies and they're totally different. And apparently they were going for both of them at the same time, and I was hoping somebody could tell me why. But I linked to both of them, and you'll see this offline. I'm not making this up. There are literally 2 product strategies with the same time horizon, 3 years. All right, so I mentioned at the start that you can't really have a product strategy without a mission and vision, so let's tell you GitLab's mission and vision, just for framing context. Again, GitLab was kind enough to publish all of this. I paraphrased this a little bit, so like I had to fit this on a slide, but you'll have to forgive me there. So GitLab's 30-year mission, they describe it as 30 years. Why does GitLab exist? We believe in a world where everyone can contribute. We believe that all digital products should be open to contributors, to contributions, from legal documents to movie scripts, websites to chip design. That's fascinating. I love it. It's really interesting. A couple of things that come out from this immediately for me is like if you think about GitLab, you're thinking about like pull requests, code hosting repositories, you're thinking about software developers. This isn't about software developers. They've got a vision that goes way beyond that, right? I don't want to tell them this, but like GitHub had this same vision like 10 years ago and it didn't really work out. Like there was a point in time where GitHub had like a 3D model viewer in GitHub that you could look at in real time. Didn't really work out. Like their legal teams had to write pull requests to make changes to their internal legal documents. Didn't really work out. But let's go at it, all right? So this is their mission. It's really interesting. One of the other things that this tells me is like if I think about what GitLab does, the competencies they have in their product, to me, this points out to me that like they're really interested in workflow. They really think that pull requests are really interesting, and collaborating around pull requests is world-changing. Cool, that's interesting. What future is GitLab trying to create? What's their vision? What's the 10-year outlook? They develop great open source software to enable people to collaborate. It's a single application based on convention over configuration that everyone should be able to afford and adapt. With GitLab, everyone can contribute. Cool. There's a callback to the mission. That's cool. GitLab, everyone can contribute. There's some interesting things here that like automatically start connecting to like strategy, right? Product packaging and pricing, right? Everyone should be able to afford and adapt GitLab. That's cool. There's some product decisions. It's a single application, and it's based on convention over configuration. And interestingly, there's still nothing here about software teams. It's still about collaboration in general. So like that's a thought experiment. Like what if they just provided this and the mission to their teams, right? What obvious gaps would that lead to? Well, like a team could be like, I'm gonna start making a 3D model viewer because our mission is to help anybody building anything to collaborate. I'm gonna make like an editor that people writing scripts can collaborate on because that's really interesting and that's part of our mission, right? So they need a level below this. They need something with a shorter outlook than 10 years to really align their teams, and that's the strategy. Awesome. They were kind enough to share not one, but 2 strategies. It's an exercise so nice they did it twice. And helpfully, like they even have a section in the strategy called the situation, which really, really helps with my narrative, so I was pleased with that. But actually, yeah, this is the narrative structure that I talked about. Their situation, if you look at it, a couple things that you'll note. It is a statement of facts. We compete in a large market space. There's a link to a TAM analysis. It's got more facts about the company. We recently surpassed the 150 million ARR milestone. Can't really dispute that. It's either true or it's not. We have high growth and retention rates. I would have liked to see numbers there. If you follow like the Amazon writing style thing, unusually high is kind of nonsense. Be quantitative when you can be, but we'll forgive them that. Then there's some interesting things here. There's connections to like the value of open source and the impact that it has. More links to like more details on the single application approach. It's a good setup. I like it.
Market categories? Wow.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to do that. Yeah, we'll get into that. All right, so what are their complications and threats? Again, they've talked about it. So if you know GitLab and what they're trying to do, you can see these kind of like writ large in their product offering. There's a tension between breadth and depth. So they're trying to own the entire software development lifecycle. From code commit to like security to like really everything, right? That's why they're competing with everybody. Yeah, it's a bit boil the ocean, right? But they got a Gartner analyst to write about it, so they're really excited about that. Sorry, no, they are. They're doing really well. I have a ton of respect for what they're doing and the product that they're creating. But again, their product strategy has an inherent tension between breadth and depth. Right? If you're trying to take over the entire software development lifecycle, and GitLab's a pretty large company now, but even for them, you know, they're competing against Microsoft. I'm pretty sure Microsoft can outgun them in terms of like number of developers. And if you're trying to build like repository hosting, code review, plus application lifecycle management, plus feature flags, plus everything else, there's a tension between making every one of those things great and providing like a 10% solution in each of those that nobody really is enthusiastic about using. And they recognize that. It's great, it's honest. Because of their open core model, there's a tension between cloud hosted and roll your self-serve, excuse me, not self-serve, host your own, and they articulate that very clearly. Third, they're trying to go after every user, right? It's back in their mission. They talk about helping everybody collaborate. Everyone can collaborate, not even just software developers, like literally everyone. But as it relates to software developers, in the short term, they're trying to sell to like a 2-person startup all the way up to a Fortune 50 company. And that's really challenging. And then finally, competition, right? If you try to boil the ocean and go after the entire software development lifecycle, every player that has an offering in the software development lifecycle is going to go at you. Microsoft, Atlassian, Synopsys, Sneak, name a company building a developer tool, and now they're competing with GitLab.
And if they're talking about everybody, they're going after Google. Let's be real, who they're really going.
They're going after a lot, right? So they're very honest. They're very clear about what their threats are. And they've got a very specific strategy that they're pointing to. And let me point out a couple things. We don't have to read this all live together, but let me point out a couple things that I think are done really well here. First, I talked about needing to be prescriptive and falsifiable, and this is prescriptive and falsifiable, right? They've made deliberate decisions, choices that would cause teams to prioritize one thing over another. They've said, look, we're going for hosted first. If you're making a decision that is for the open source product versus hosted, trend towards hosted, because GitLab, number 5, GitLab hosted first. Second, they identify their core journeys and they want to make the core journeys lovable first, right? So they're going for depth in the core before breadth when necessary, right? So they're making a deliberate strategy choice there. Community adoption, the power of a single application. This is a key part of their strategy. Their strategy is, look, if we own this entire software development lifecycle, we can create linkages between stages in that lifecycle, integrations within our own product that are much deeper and richer than what anyone else can create. Again, I was at Atlassian. I saw them try to do this. Didn't work out super well, but maybe it'll work out for GitLab. At the very minimum, right, it's a very reasonable thing to pursue. All right, so I took that and then I wrapped it up into like a quick summary. And again, this is my own words, but like if I was going to try to provide a takeaway of that, they want to become the leading complete DevOps value stream delivery platform. Their goal is to help, in the 3-year outlook, is to help customers build software faster. So again, we've gone down from everyone can contribute to software teams now, including cloud native applications, mobile applications. This is something that I cut from the previous slide, but they have this notion of dual flywheels that are helping them accelerate, and that's what's propelling them to efficiently be the default choice. And then in the enterprise market, so focus, right? They're focusing on the enterprise market. So that's just one way that you can put all of this together into a coherent strategy. I think GitLab they did a great job here, candidly. And I think we would all do so. We would all be pretty pleased if we had something of this caliber and depth. Go check it out online. There are links to all of this. And you can actually dig through and you can read some of their supporting evidence. One thing that I noticed is they say that they're fully transparent and everything is in their handbook. They now have an internal handbook. And so a lot of the supporting data is like broken links that go look in our internal handbook, but only if you're a GitLab employee. It was inevitable. So I wanted to conclude by sharing some of the resources that I used when I was thinking this through. A couple tweet storms that I found really, really helpful. Two from Shreyas Doshi on product strategy and sort of like the hierarchy of supporting documents from like mission, vision, and strategy and the role that they play. A tweet storm from JML, Jean-Michel Lemieux, who was the CTO at Atlassian and then later at Shopify, who wrote a really cool set of tweets on alignment and the exponential decay of alignment, which I thought was fascinating, and then some of the GitLab material that I shared here. So that's all I've got. Hope this was helpful. And happy to take questions.